Hi, I'm Paul Gilbert. Today we're going to focus on governance and management, and we're going to look at how they can be done very well and an example from history of how they can't be done very well. We're looking today in the book Lead Like a General, which is modern leadership seen through the Civil War. There's a board of directors for every corporation, and their role is to hire the CEO, set strategic goals, set policy, and do financial oversight. In a city, you'd have a city council, but even a nonprofit has a board of directors that has this function. The board then hires the CEO, and basically the CEO is the only employee that works for the board of directors, which is kind of interesting, because they're the top authority in the organization, but their role is defined because of what governance is and is not. And so we talk about the difference between governance and management. The CEO then, they have the rest of all the employees report in some chain of command, some org chart up to the CEO. And their job is to implement the strategy, to do the day-to-day operations. The CEO's job is to be kind of the go-between between the board and the rest of the organization. Their job is really to lead the organization to achieve the goals that are set by the board, working with the CEO. Interesting thing is, almost no one really remembers who Charles Stone was. You know, you've all heard of Grant and Lee and those names. But one of the reasons that we don't know about Charles Stone is because in the first year of the war, his career sort of rose and then was shot. What happens at Bluff is, this is the Maryland side, this is the Virginia side, there's an island in between. And on the Virginia side, the reason they call it Bluff is because there's like an 80-foot drop from the plateau up here straight down to the river. So when you go out there, it's not an exactly sheer cliff, but it is a very, very steep bluff. You know, it's the kind of thing where you probably need ropes to get up and down it in any kind of organized way. There are little trails that you can take that sort of wind around, switch back up, that'll get you up to the top, but most of it's straight down. So Stone sends some soldiers across to see what's happening. They look around. They actually misidentify a group of trees and think it's a camp. They call back. They say, hey, we're here. We think this camp is empty. Why don't you send more reinforcements? So all day long, they're sending reinforcements over from Maryland to Virginia. They're doing it in 3 little flat-bottom boats. They have 3 little, basically John boats, that they're loading troops on, sending it across. They even send 3 cannons across. I can't imagine carrying a cannon across in a little flat-bottom rowboat. But they do. They haul it up, all up here. Stone is back on the Maryland side, and he's sort of hearing the reports that are coming in. And there's a big delay, you know, between something happens here, someone has to get over here, take a boat across the river, get on a horse, ride a few miles, tell them what's going on, get orders, come back. Communication is not good. By later in the day, the person in charge on the Virginia side is this gentleman right here. This guy is named Edward Baker, and he has the rank of a colonel. But guess what? He's not a military person. He served in some militia, just almost as an honorary thing. What he is he's a U.S. senator. He has just stepped down from being a senator from the state of Oregon, and he is joined up with the Army because the war has started. Everyone thinks it's going to be a very short deal. He also happens to be a longtime personal friend of Abraham Lincoln. So this guy in the mid-1800s was incredibly famous. Everyone knew him. he would be like, who's some of the biggest names in Washington? You know, he'd be like, you know, Edward Kennedy before he passed away, or John McCain. You know, someone from the Senate that basically everybody knows and is extremely famous and extremely powerful. Can you imagine being not only a senator but best friends with the president? So this guy is in charge of the forces on the Virginia side, and he has no experience at all. And guess what? He doesn't listen to any of the military officers that are over there that actually know what they're doing. So it's his great idea to line up with their backs to the bluff. So they basically put their, you know, you see these lines here. These are the Union forces, and they set themselves up so that they have, if they're pushed back, they literally fall over the cliff. And then all the other Union officers are saying, gee, Colonel Baker, we think it might be better to, you know, line up this way or line up this way or some other plan. The Confederates come in, there's a pitched battle, and at the end, sure enough, they're driven right off the cliff. So probably as many Union soldiers die from being driven off the cliff than from the actual battle. And then once they're driven off the cliff, the Confederates are you know, up on this high ground just shooting down at these Union soldiers. Back in the mid-1800s, most people didn't know how to swim. These folks are all wearing wool outfits, heavy gear, and probably 1 out of 10 of them knows how to swim, and they're having to get across the river. It's a disaster. And guess what happens to Baker? That's Baker right there. He gets shot in the battle. So he basically messes everything up, loses the battle, but he is killed in the process. So, does anyone have any guess what Congress might do about this? All right, let me tell you about what Congress does. Congress sets up a special committee to investigate the conduct of the war. They're afraid. They're losing. They just lost the first battle of Manassas. Now they lost Bluff. And their favorite person, Edward Baker, who's a former senator and friend of the president, has been killed. Well, Baker cannot be at fault. Baker is famous. He's the hero. So they have to find someone else, or they choose to find someone else to put at fault. And they turn to look at Stone. And they hold some hearings. You've all seen congressional hearings on TV. And they grill everyone, and they have their own investigators out there. And guess what? Stone is given orders from McClellan, who is his commander. Don't tell Congress anything about your orders. McClellan is afraid that he's going to get caned. So he kind of hangs Stone out to dry. So at about midnight, on February 9th, 1862, another general that knew him well, George Sykes, arrests Stone in the middle of the night. Eventually, he got another senator, James McDougal, to attach a bill to the military pay bill. So, of course, it's the middle of the Civil War, or beginning of the Civil War. The one bill that's going to pass is the one that pays all the troops, the entire army. So McDougal attaches a bill there that says that if an officer is arrested, they need to be brought up on charges within 8 days and a trial within 30 days. And if that hasn't happened, they have to let him go. Well, Stone is the only officer in the entire army that's being held without charges or trial. He spent his 6 months writing letters. He wrote letters to everyone that he could. He wrote letters to members of Congress, to other officers. And the interesting thing about it is he's being scapegoated here, and yet he was completely professional in everything he did. So, what are they supposed to do? And we've talked some about the financial oversight, the policy direction, strategic goals, hiring the CEO. What do you do if you are a CEO and you have a board, and the board is more interested in micromanaging, which this is fun stuff, you know? You get into the weeds, you get to figure out, you know, how things should run. These things are pretty abstract, harder to get passionate about, you know, looking at the audit statements and, you know, looking at very broad, big picture goals. A lot easier to get in there, get your hands dirty. And part of it is to make sure that the board is really engaged, because guess what? While these things aren't always the funnest tasks, they are absolutely vitally important to any organization out there. You need to have someone providing financial oversight that is very responsible, that's not in the organizational structure. That's really important. Where a lot of the companies that had problems like Enron and WorldCom, they wound up with problems because their board wasn't paying attention to their financial oversight role. And if they had been, those problems could have been avoided. Also, setting policies, setting strategic goals, you gotta have that. If the whole organization is focused on day-to-day activities, you know what happens? Remember that chart of life cycle of an organization? If you're just focused on the day-to-day all the time, you're gonna wind up going into decline because you're not looking at the external factors, at the big picture, setting strategies, figuring out how to do new things, because you're too busy with answering the phone, answering the emails, doing the things that have to be done today. The board is in a position where they're not engaged in the day-to-day. They can step back and look at the environment in which you're operating in, look at, are there competitors out there that you need to be aware of? Are there new trends? Are things going to be done differently 5 years from now from the way they're done now? They're vitally important, because if you don't have this function happening well, then the organization will sputter out.